Holy moly, it goes way back. Hey, how y'all doing in the nosebleeds? Excellent. So that's what we're gonna talk about. This whole talk will be about having the courage to suck and reimagining humility. I'm gonna start with a story. So this took place a few years back, and I found myself sharing a double bed with my older sister in my childhood home. Now, my sister and I are grown-ass women. She has 4 grown kids, I run a business, and we're sleeping in this bed together, and everything's going fine till morning. Now, in the morning, we were headed to a funeral. But what happened in the morning was that I woke up a little earlier than my sister, and I turned on what I thought was the least offensive light in the room. This woke her up, which pissed her off, which made her flip out. Now, there are 2 things you need to know to understand what happens next. My sister always flips out. This is her MO. And second, I had had enough of it, and I had actually recently made a pact to myself that the next time she flipped out on me, I would not engage, but I would turn away with quiet dignity and walk away. I thought that was an awesome plan. Like, it would be like turning my back, like with the flames exploding and the credits rolling and like you're cheering for the underdog. So she flips out, and I realize this is my Oscar-winning moment. It is go time. So I turn around and I walk away. And just as I'm starting to pat myself on the back, I realize she's behind me. And this is not part of the plan. I hadn't planned on her following me, so I had no action plan for this. So the only thing I thought to do was to pick up the pace, which then she picks up the pace. And I then say, "Go away. I'm trying to walk away. You aren't supposed to follow me." And she continues to follow me, so I pick up my pace more. And we are in a full throttle chase through my parents' house at this point. I go down the hallway, down the stairs. She is right behind me. I go down the next hallway and into the living room. And I grab the door and I try to shut it, but she catches it. And so we do this back and forth like the slapstick thing. And we're push, till I let go. She topples and I run past her to the next door. I grab that door, I get to the other side of it, but she grabs it. And then we're in this pull. I mean, it is ridiculous. And I'm swearing at the top of my lungs. I let go, she topples, I run past again. I go to the bottom of that. So this is not a big house. I'm making it sound like it's a mansion. We are grown women, and I'm going, "Go away." And she's going, "What is wrong with you?" And I get to the bottom of those steps, and I go to the back of the room, to the basement, to the back room of the basement. And at that point, I had gone fast enough, and I get to it, and I shut it. And I had a momentary sense of triumph. And I was like, "Yeah, that's right. Who's in charge now?" I yelled to the door as she walks away, and it only takes me a moment to realize the answer is not me. Because she is walking up the stairs like a normal human being where the rest of humanity is, getting ready for a funeral, while I am downstairs in the basement of my parents' home, in the back room where all things 70s go to die. There's headless Barbies, there's, a Nordic track with boxes stacked, 8-track tapes, a box of dot matrix paper. I mean, it didn't take long for me to realize I had lost again, and that I would always lose. So that was a very humbling moment for me, that story. And that is the stuff of great storytelling. So that's why when Joel contacted me and asked me to do a talk on this subject, I was really excited, because it comes up a lot in my work as a storyteller, but also as a storytelling coach and director. I've clocked like thousands of hours coaching individuals to tell their own true stories on stage. And it comes up a lot. So I find that some people, not everybody, because you can tell from Joel's introduction, he has a similar expectation of what humility means to him. But I do think sometimes it's misunderstood. And people will talk about it in terms of it being a low self-esteem or insecurity. Like, I had a huge bite of humble pie today. I was feeling everything went wrong. I felt really bad about myself. But I don't see it that way at all. In fact, what I see humility as, I think it's a much more powerful agent in our creative lives, because you need humility to keep a check on your ego. It is the counterbalance to hubris. And without the temperance of humility, your ego will self-destruct. I kind of see it like humility is the wise, patient parent, and the ego is this like rambunctious adolescent who just knows everything. So it's a balance, and you need both. As I said, this comes up a lot in storytelling, but really in any creative process, like Joel said. You need humility in order to engage in any creative process. But what I'm going to do is tell you what storytelling has taught me about humility. Are you ready? All right. So first, number one, be vulnerable. Really, every good story requires that you be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, you have to humble yourself. So I'm going to show you an example. Well, actually, I'm going to break it down into a couple ways that you can be vulnerable. One of the most obvious ways to be vulnerable is to accept and admit to weaknesses, fears, doubts, and failures. And I'm going to show you an example.
Fortunate to have good health my whole life. I have never broken a bone, knock on wood. I've never had major surgery. When I floss, my gums don't bleed. I'm in very, very good shape. I think if anyone were to take a knock at my health, it would be just the fact that I have debilitating panic attacks. Like, they are horrific. And that is a blow to your ego when you're a guy, because as a kid and you're growing up to be a man, they tell you, like, a man can handle pressure and he can handle stress. Like, that's what they do. And somehow or another, panic has become the antithesis of that, even though it's not. But like, if you watch a football game, you hear the commentator, they go, the quarterback's feeling the pressure coming from the left side, and he just panics, throws an interception. And so that's what I think people think panic is, but for me, it's not like that. Like, I can be walking along just chilling, and all of a sudden, like, I can't breathe. And it's like I'm pulling air in, but it feels like it's coming in through a straw. And then, like, my heart catches wind of the fact that I can't breathe, and it's like, what's that? You can't breathe? Well, holy shit, I'll start beating real fast. And I'm like, and it's like a little hummingbird. It's just, like Rocky on the speed bag, just and I go, oh my God, and it feels like it's gonna pop.
So that's a great example of a story based on something that's literally just putting it all out there. Not something he probably wants to share, and he even actually makes it extra clear because he's like, this is hard when it's the antithesis of being a man. So now it's your turn, and I am going to orchestrate a very short story swap. So what I want you to do without saying a word is look to someone near you and non-verbally choose a partner. Everybody got a partner? All right. Now non-verbally choose who's going to be partner one. Got it? Okay, I'm going to give you a prompt, and when I say go, partner one is going to talk for a minute or maybe 30 seconds. We'll see if it... And then I'm going to go like this. and then it'll be partner two's turn, and then I'm going to do this again, 2 times, whatever, and then you'll stop, so we can keep moving. Yep. Will you time, because I left my phone, so. All right, so the prompt goes like this, and this is partner number 1. I want you to answer this question or finish this statement. I failed massively when what? Ready? Partner 1, go. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, switch. Partner 2. All right. Man, we must have some failures in the house. There's a lot of talking. So great. I'm going to move on to our next example of ways to be vulnerable. And I think this is a little less obvious, but it'll make sense when you see it. So admit to wanting something, caring about something, or being affected. So actually, that's incredibly vulnerable and exposed. When you actually do want something, when you do care about something and you have feelings about something, when it makes you, when you're affected. But you really cannot have a good story without that. And sometimes we get people that come in and they'll come with the story idea and you'll be like, well, how'd you feel about that? And they'll be like, I felt fine. Okay. And you really, there's nowhere to go with that, because the only thing that is going to matter to your audience is if it's something that matters to you. Something has to be at stake. And if nothing's at stake, then you're unaffected. So, but that's a really vulnerable place to be. Now, when you walked in, these name tags said, asked you, what is something you wanted to be when you were younger? And that's a fairly safe question. But I'm going to ask you a little bit of a harder question that makes you a little bit more vulnerable. So we'll do a sample first, and then we'll do the clip. Okay, but I'm going to give a setup to this. So Shalini, this is her first story. She took a one-day boot camp, then she did this story for a show we called Fools Rush In, and April Fool's Day. And she, her parents came to her to tell her that it was time for her to sign up to go to this matrimonial conference. One which, by the way, the parents attend also. So this is her reaction to being invited to the matrimonial conference.
So then I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what's going to happen at this conference? And she said, well, I don't know, but you totally need to go. So the argument wasn't really very persuasive, but we went back and forth a lot over the years. Over the days, sorry, it wasn't that long. So what I found out was that the event was taking place in this region known as Little India. It's otherwise known as New Jersey. And no apologies for those of you that are from there, but it did not add to its appeal. It's funny, so we went back and forth a lot, like I said, and I don't know what it was. It was just that I started to soften. I started to think about, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? And honestly, what if I date people of all ethnicities. I'm totally fair game. But what if my Indian prince is totally going to be there waiting for me at this conference? Can I really afford not to go? Like, seriously?
All right, so that's an awesome example of, here's what happened. In the beginning, she's like, I don't want to do this. I'm above all this. But then she takes a turn, right? And she's like, but what if my prince is there? And now she's exposing herself, and now she's vulnerable. And by doing that, we now care about her. And we are now rooting for her, our protagonist. But if she hadn't done that, if she hadn't exposed something that she desires, this story we wouldn't be invested in the story in the same way. All right, so now it's your turn. So partner 2, your question, your statement is, one thing I really want, but I don't usually admit, is what? Begin. Okay, switch. Now, partner 1, you get to answer this question. Begin. I am sorry, that is so obnoxious. I know. All right, so a little harder than sharing what you wanted as a child, I'm guessing, maybe, I don't know. All right, so we have one more way that I want to define what it means to be vulnerable. And that next way is to be honest, but specifically to be honest with yourself. And so what you'll find, in order to tell a good story, you really have to be honest with yourself. And sometimes you don't want to be, and sometimes you don't really want to accept what you discover. But that's really important to telling a good story. And I find that comes up a lot in coaching. You'll be working through a story with someone, and something will not ring true. You'll say, okay, are you being honest with yourself right now? And then the person will go, no. Because you hear it and you feel it, and you really need to get as honest as you can in those moments. So I am going to play the next clip, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. The backstory is that he pierced his package because he was a virgin into college, and he thought that might be his ticket to sex.
Now, at this point, I still thought I would have time to come up with an explanation for my piercings like some other night. But that night, before I was ready, Laura's hand swooped down there. And I heard this faint noise, like tunk. See, Laura wore this big metal ring on her finger, and it hit my piercing through my pants. Tunk. So I start squirming, I'm pulling back, but she's on top of me, I can't get any leverage, and then I hear it again. And this time I noticed Laura has stopped, and she started tapping me, like tongue, tongue, ta-tongue, tongue, tongue, tongue. Oh. So I start to try to think how on earth I'm going to explain myself. I mean, maybe I could tell her it was some shrapnel from Nam, or like a little Saturday night special. I don't know, but the thing is, I trusted Laura. And so I started telling her the story I'm telling you now about my virginity and how embarrassed I was and this stupid plan with the piercing. I opened up to her. And as soon as I finished, Laura looked at me and pretty much just started laughing in my face. Like, she was actually rolling around on her bed. She was laughing so hard. And at that, I just fled her apartment. And I just remember being furious with myself on the ride home, like slamming my hand on the dashboard, because, I mean, this whole thing had backfired perfectly. This goddamn piercing was now preventing me from having sex.
Okay. So this actually could fit in any one of those things. He's admitting to weakness or doubt. He's actually really clear about a desire that he has, sort of an embarrassing desire. But he's also honest with the fact that this is what he wants and this is what's motivating him, and that this is not going well. And if he wasn't honest with himself in these moments, the story would go nowhere. And I want to say that motivation is often the thing that you really have to dig into, the why of what you do. So I actually want to mention an example of a challenge I had in this regard about being honest, and I think it's a great example of what happens when you're not honest. So I had a storyteller working on a story that was about a mixed marriage between a Jewish person and a Catholic person. And her premise was that, that the arc was that they had some challenges, but they were working it out, and they figured out how to do it, and they were both accepting of each other's religions. However, in the coaching process, every time she would explain how things were going, she'd be like, well, I did take the cross off the wall. Yeah, and I did take it off the wall and put it on a shelf. Well, then I moved it to the back of a shelf. And while he was going to Jewish studies classes and synagogue and accepting, she didn't want to go to any of the Catholic rituals. So I had to be like, So you keep saying that you're fine with him being Catholic, but that's not the story I'm hearing. And that's one of those moments where she had to be like, yeah. And Anyway, they broke up. But I think the story process, I did her a favor. Okay. So, all right, so now it's your turn. And actually, wordlessly, turn to somebody else in the room so you can have a different partner for this one. Got it? This is our last swap. Hold up, don't start. Decide who's going first. Okay, pause for just a second. Let me get your attention back. All right, number one, your question, your statement is, one of my least proud moments happened when, begin. You have 1 minute. Okay, switch, partner two. All right, how y'all feeling? You bearing your souls? Are you feeling exposed? It feels kind of good to be exposed. Okay, that whole section still fell under number one. My rule number one, lesson number one that I've learned, what I've learned about humility from storytelling. And that all three of those things were what I wanted to break down to just to explain how I see vulnerability. All right, so let's go to number two. Number two is appreciate when things are larger than you. So that's one of the meanings of humility. Having an understanding of your station, knowing when someone else has more, to, like where you land on the spectrum. And I bring this up also because it's particularly important that, okay, I'm sorry, not just your station, but just sort of where you are in the context of the whole. So that's really critical in storytelling because every good story needs to have a universal meaning. It needs to resonate with your audience. You may have a story that you think is just awesome and it means something to you, but if it doesn't mean something to your audience, it's not going to be a good story. So, for instance, somebody might... there's certain assumptions made about stories that people like to tell, right? Oh my God, I lost my luggage, and there was all this hijinks, and then it was there, and then it was here, and then, oh my gosh, I finally got it. Okay, that's actually, there's no universal meaning there unless there's something at stake, unless you go back to those things in vulnerability. What is it that you want? Where is that weakness? What is at stake that I should care about this story? So if you look at those last three stories, they all have a universal theme if you wanted to identify them. So Mike's first story about panic attacks, that's about being a man. He talks about being a man and how these panic attacks are interfering with his identity and his self-concept as a man. That's universal. The second story, Shalini, it's universal. That's sort of the search for love. And Sam's, I was going to also looking for love. So that's really important. Okay, next. Having the courage to suck, which was the title slide. So this really goes back. So what we've talked about up to now is more about content. What goes in your stories? What do you talk about? And this is more about process. And this goes into every creative process. If you do not have the courage to suck, then it's really hard to even start. And it takes a ton of courage to know going into it that you're not going to be good at something. And that's where I think that humility is actually an act of strength, right? You have to have a really solid core to expose yourself to the discomfort and to some degree the suffering of not being good at something. And along with that comes being open to help. So the worst people to work with are the ones who are like, oh, I got this, I'm in Toastmasters. I got this, I do PowerPoint, I can string two words together, I got this. I do stand-up. So, because what happens is that their ego is way in the way. There's just no room for any learning or growth. But the best people, some of them are the most accomplished in their fields. We have editors and newscasters and radio producers and published authors, and they will be actually the ones with the most humility. They will be like, please, I am new to this. Tell me what I can do better. And it makes all the difference. And I often find myself saying, someone will ask me, oh, how was the rehearsal? I'll be like, oh, it was really good. They really humbled themselves to the process. And then we're able to work together and come up with something better, hopefully. And this is my last note about what I've learned about humility through storytelling. And that is, there's something to be said about the act of performing that is actually in service to others. And I think that there's a misperception about people that get up on stage and what that dynamic is between the person on stage and the audience. I think the perception is that, oh yeah, man, oh yeah, you always were a ham, or you always wanted to be the center of attention. And I don't think that's what it's about, because it's really hard work. And as you did in your own pairs, you have to really push yourself and expose yourself. And with the question of universality, you have to go into it knowing, well, what is my audience getting out of this? What am I giving to my audience right now? And that's what a good storyteller does. And so they are in service to others, and that is the supreme act of humility. So I really do think that there's a big dose of humility every time someone gets up on stage and does it well. And then, in fact, the difference between a good story and a bad story is someone who gets up there with total arrogance and narcissism, and then you don't connect. And that's exactly when hubris has taken over. So one more note, because we have a little bit of time, is a clarity between real and false humility. What happens is people think by putting themselves down, which is actually why I think it's the opposite of what I started with, of the definition I started with. When you put yourself, you're like, oh, was I bad? I don't know. Do you think what happens in that dynamic is I'm asking something of you. I'm demanding of you to give me praise, to make me feel better. But true humility is the other way around. I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to give back, and I'm trying to grow. And so that is when real humility is in play. So I want to recap our 5 rules or 5 lessons I've learned from storytelling about humility. 1, to be vulnerable, to be aware that things are larger than you, to have the courage to suck, to be open to help, and to serve others. So, what I'd like you to take away today is not that humility is about being down on yourself or insecure, but it is truly an act of strength and a strong core of self-confidence to be open and to be able to expose yourself and to be open to growth. Thank you.